They were in the middle of Hilchos. And we started about the specialty of the mitzvah that we learned about, that this is different than every other mitzvah, or than almost every other mitzvah, that for this particular mitzvah, we're allowed to do it counting on the schar, the reward that we get from this mitzvah. That you put a mezuzah on your door, so it protects your home and it protects you wherever you are. When you go into your home, when you go out of your home, wherever you are, you have a kosher mezuzah on your door, on your doors. That's a protection for you. And that's why it says that Misha Yeshla, Misha Zoy, Aval Misha Eini Zohir, B'mitzvahs Mezuzah, Ein Mashi Yishmer V'yogen Olav, V'meitziatz Mechoshev L'sakonis Min V'chutz. Somebody doesn't have the mezuzah on his door, he has no protection. So he sort of opens himself up to different issues that could occur. I mean, to the extent that the Rebbe even talked about it different times when there was issues that occurred, and the Rebbe said, but interestingly, mezuzahs were checked and the mezuzahs weren't on properly, or the mezuzahs missing. So the Rebbe directly associated the Shmira with the mezuzahs on the doors, with the proper mezuzahs on the doors. And it's for that reason that, as we talked about for tefillin, that tefillin al pidin have to be checked twice every 7 years. But even though al pidin twice in 7 years is sufficient, still we try to check them every elul if possible. And similarly, so with mezuzahs, the same story. You have to check it similarly so twice every 7 years, but it's best to check it every elul. That's a time, or once a year. And the time in the year to check it, the best time is an elul, and for the extra protection that it brings. Amru Razal, the Chazal tell us, the Chachamim teach us, Kol mi sheyesh lo tefillin b'roshei v'zroyoi v'tzitzis b'bigdoi, that everybody that has tefillin b'roshei v'zroyoi on his head and on his hand, on his arm, v'tzitzis b'bigdoi, and he has tzitzis on. He's wearing a pair of tzitzis. Mezuzah b'pischai, and he has a mezuzah on his doors. Muchzikhu shelo yachta. He has a special protection also that he will not sin. Sharayesh le maskirim rabim. Why is he going to be protected that he shouldn't sin? So the Chazal tell us the reason for this is a very simple one, because he has a lot of reminders, a continuous reminder. The tefillin that he's wearing, the mezuzah that he sees when he goes in and out of his home, the tzitzis that he continues to wear. And it's as if those are the angels that protect him continuously from sinning. So obviously it protects him from sinning, but also, as the pasuk says, Shenamar, there's a pasuk that supports that and says, that the Yidden that fulfill these mitzvahs, they sort of have angels around them that take them away, that protect them from anything negative that could possibly occur to them. And it's as the Rebbe once said, it's an extra protection. It's not as if, somebody will say, well, he had a mezuzah and how did this happen? So the Rebbe once pointed out that it's like a soldier in the army that's wearing a helmet. So if you don't wear a helmet, you say that's foolish. Why don't you put a helmet on to be protected? Is that an assurance that everybody that wears a helmet never gets hurt? But it's certainly a extra protection, and no soldier will go into war without wearing a helmet. So similarly, so that's what all of these mitzvahs are all about. The special protection that Hashem says, when you wear that, you have a special protection. And because of that special protection, it's especially very helpful. And as the Rebbe also pointed out many times, that the way that we can be helping the soldiers in Eretz Yisrael, for those that are already doing these mitzvahs, for us to enhance our fulfillment of these particular mitzvahs, and to get others that don't to put on those, to do that mitzvah. Just today, just to share with you, we were talking about the other day, Rabbi Seitz, remember about having tefillin in the car. So today I happened to be somewhere, I had tefillin in my car, and I got two people that never put on tefillin in their life. I was talking to them and I said to them, tefillin, and do it for the soldiers and whatever. And I'm in my car. I stepped out of my car to talk to them. And I said, how about putting it on now? They thought, putting it on now. What does he have tefillin to put on with me now? And he said, sure, if you have tefillin now, I'll put it on. I said, wait a second. Walk into the car, take out the pair of tefillin, and I put on with two people that never, this is the first time in their life that they put on tefillin. And they were so excited to do it for the soldiers in Israel. So it's, people are we have to use the opportunity, particularly now, when we can bring extra shmira for ourselves, for the soldiers in Eretz Yisrael, by enhancing this mitzvah. When a person has a mezuzah on his door, Azai calls manshi yikonis lebayis v'yetzi mimeno, every time he goes into his house and leaves his house, yivgosh b'yichud Hashem. So when he walks in and out of his home, what does he sort of bump into? He comes to a mezuzah. What's the mezuzah? The mezuzah represents the Achdus Hashem, the unity of Hashem, because that's what it says in the mezuzah. Shmoi Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'yizker ahavasei, and he reminds himself of his special love to Hashem and Hashem's special love to him. V'yard mishnasi v'isukei behavli azman, and will awaken himself from being involved in foolishness. V'yeda she'ein davar ha'emed la'elam ula'omi elamim, and will remind himself that there's actually nothing that exists forever. Elo yediyas HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the only thing that's there forever, that is something that's going to last, that is Ein Sof, that is always there, always was, and always is, and always will be, only HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Umiyad, when he recognizes that, when he thinks about that, by looking at the mezuzah, he will turn back to his appropriate ways and will do what he needs to, and that's a continuous reminder and assistance, a help to be able to stay on track. And furthermore, when he does leave his home, and so too when he enters his home, he should put his hand on the mezuzah and kiss it. In other words, touch the mezuzah and kiss it. Kivan shemataras hamezuzah, because the purpose of the mezuzah is lahaskir shema yisbarich. The purpose of the mezuzah is to remember Hashem, as we just mentioned. So too, the Rebbe spoke about many times that it's important in chinuch to train children to kiss the mezuzah. Both as they get up in the morning, they should walk out of their room and touch the mezuzah and kiss the mezuzah. And so too, and so too, these are things that the Rebbe actually said, that you should get children used to kissing the mezuzah as soon as they get up and before they go to sleep. And it's again a reminder, for the children to remember they're always protected by Hashem, and also a reminder that they're always connected with Hashem. And by touching the mezuzah, and you see when children get used to it, and children have a special affinity to the mezuzah, they have a special affinity to Yiras Shamayim. They feel strongly about the mezuzah, feel strongly about making brachas, and so on. And that is what reminds them of what that's all about. And truthfully, these are the kinds of things we should learn from the children. We see the way they connect so strongly with the mezuzah, and you ask them why, and it's just the way it is. There's no why. They know this is what they've learned. This is what you do. We too should also, as we walk in and we see the mezuzah, we give a kiss to mezuzah. This should be our special connection to Hashem. Now we're going to learn about the parshas that are written on the parchment of the mezuzah. So obviously, it's important that it should be on parchment. Unfortunately, sometimes you go to check mezuzahs in somebody's home and you find, instead of parchment, you find it printed on whatever, not parchment, and you have to be able to tell. Sometimes they make them so that they look like parchment and they're not parchment. But sometimes you just find whatever in the mezuzahs. And, like they tell the famous story that there was this architect that was chosen to build a home for somebody, and he built this fanciest kind of home and a beautiful home. And then afterwards, after he built the home and did a beautiful job, the person that asked him to build the home told him that I left those mezuzahs out there, and I would like for you to hang them up. And he made a note where they should be hung up. And so obviously he did it too. The guy hung up the mezuzahs. But the guy just said, I just want to make a note to you. I hung up the mezuzahs, but the instructions in it I left on the fridge. So if you don't know what those things are really all about, instructions, those I left on the fridge, the mezuzahs are hanging. So the mezuzahs in the beautiful mezuzah cases is really the most important aspect. It doesn't need the case, it needs the mezuzah. As a matter of fact, some people are especially careful about not having a fancier case, but rather having the mezuzah itself wrapped in paper. And they have on the paper, there's a shin or whatever, but it's there's nothing else besides it. It's sometimes important to have a case so that it's protected and so on. But the key is obviously to make sure, not so that the case is a beautiful one, but that the parchment in the case is the most beautiful parchment. Today, to buy a proper mezuzah, you can spend up to $200 for a good mezuzah, or maybe even more. They're not cheap. They say the cheapest really good mezuzah, if you want to get a good mezuzah, the cheapest that you can get it for today is maybe about $75. Once upon a time, you could have gotten a mezuzah for $10, for $20. $180 each. So wasn't far off. But you can get them for $250. I've already heard that too. Yeah. So again, and a lot of work is put into it. A lot of work is put into preparing the parchments properly. Sometimes the sefer writes it, but the question is, where did he get the parchment? Was the parchment made properly? So, and then you have certain people that are experts in making the parchment. And because they're such experts and are so careful about it, they charge much more than just any parchment. And as a result of that, when the sefer gets the parchment already, it's cost him quite a bit. And on top of that, he spends a lot of time writing the parshas. And the intention he has to have, and the time that it takes for him to write a parsha well. You can tell the difference between a parsha that was written carefully or a parsha that was written just to get it over with onto the next one. You can see it, you look at it, and you don't need an expert to look at it to see that. You might need an expert to look at a good parsha that was written properly, but you see the guy that wrote it didn't have a lot of experience. But sometimes you just look at a parsha and you say he was writing it like, as they say, cheaper by the dozen, instead of writing a one very carefully. In the same time that a good sefer writes one, this person was able to write 5 or 10, not because he can write better, but because he doesn't take the time to write it as careful as he should to make sure every piece of it, every part of it is written very carefully. So it's important. So on the cloth, on the parchment, there's 2 parshas. The 2 parshas are Shema and Vahoyim Shemaya. First parsha is the Shema, and the next one is Vahoyim Shemaya. And why are those 2 parshas written? Because in these 2 parshas it says, the chiyuv, the obligation to put a mezuzah on your door, is mentioned in these 2 parshas, and that's why it's these 2 parshas that are written on a mezuzah. So besides the parsha of Shema and the parsha of Vahoyim Shemaya, in addition to that, there's something else written on a mezuzah. Anybody familiar with what the something else is? So there's on the outside of the mezuzah, we always see the shin, the dalet, and the yud. That's Hashem's name. But besides that, on the bottom, which you don't see, there's something else that's written. And we'll get to that in a minute. And I don't have a mezuzah in front of you to show you, but trust me that it's so. And if it's not there, it's not a kosher mezuzah. So what is it? On the outside of the mezuzah, on the inside, you have the Shema and the Bahayim Shemaya. On the outside of the mezuzah, on the outside, shalaklaf of the parchment, Koisev HaSefer Hashem Shin Daled Yud. So the Sefer writes the Shin, the Daled, and the Yud, and that you see often. You see the Shin Daled Yud. V'tzarech sheyira Shem Zeh b'chutz, and it's important that you should be able to see that. In addition to that, there's something else that's written on the outside of the parchment. In other words, on the inside, there's the parshas. On the outside, there's the Shin Daled Yud and something else. What's the something else? It's written Chav Vav Zayin Vav Kuzu B'muchsaz, which is right. Chav Vav Zayin Vav. Next word is Beis Mem Vav Chav Samach Zayin. And the next word is Chav Vav Zayin Vav. What does that mean? Anybody knows what that means? It's not in Hebrew, it's not in French, it's not in Chinese, it's not in, what is it? It's in Mezuza language. There's a special Mezuza language. And what is the special Mezuza language? The special Mezuza language is, when you take a look at the Aleph base, the Mezuza language is, instead of an Aleph, you write the next letter, base. If you want to write an Aleph, you put down a base instead of the Aleph. So you always use the next letter instead of the letter that it actually is. So if you take a look, Kuzu, what's Kuzu? The Chav is what? Take a letter before the Chav is Yud. So that's Yud. Vav, what's the letter? What does Vav represent? A Hey. What does Zayin represent? Vav. And then again Vav. So you have Kuzu is Yud K Vav K, Hashem's name. But it's in Mezuza language. The next one is Bimu Chazu. So again, so it's Hashem's name, and then Elikenu. Bimu Chazu is Beis, is the Aleph, and the Mem is the Lamed, and so on. So it's Hashem Elikenu, and then again Hashem. So it's Hashem Elikenu Hashem, but it's written in Mezuza language, and it's a special. It's sort of a code that al pi Kabbalah that should be written on the outside of the Mezuza. It's interesting that's. There were times when people wanted to write things to other people and didn't want people to recognize what they're doing, so they used this kind of code. They would say, I'm writing it in Mezuza language. It's an interesting story that actually happened with somebody that used to live in our community. When she was a girl, she wrote a letter to the Rebbe, and in it, she felt like she wanted to give the Rebbe a bracha that he should have children. But at the same time, she felt bad about, she didn't want anybody to see that she's writing that. And she thought, who knows, maybe the secretaries are going to read it, and she doesn't want them to read it. So she wrote it in Mezuza language. She wrote exactly what she wanted in Hebrew, and then she wrote it over in Mezuza language, and that's the way she wrote it to the Rebbe. What's interesting is the Rebbe looked at it and responded, and the Rebbe responded to her also in Mezuza language. Very interesting. So it's anyway. The point of it is, in this case with the Mezuza, we know that on the one hand, on the inside there needs to be the parshas. On the outside, you have Hashem's name, Shin Daled Yud. Besides that, you also have in the Mezuza language, you have Hashem Elikenu Hashem.
Mezuza language, you want a smaller text.
I'll take tomorrow. I'll bring a mezuzah. No, it's not in a small text. I'll show it to you. It's interesting to see it. Bli neder. I don't forget. Okay, Ma'ariv, Rabbi Yosef Chaim. How about? We haven't had the privilege of hearing you for a while. Yeah, it's a privilege.